phrase kasatsu jizai refers to a martial arts ideal meaning the ability to either preserve life or take it away at will. In modern Japan, part of that tradition eventually became the foundation of the nationally licensed medical profession known as Judo Seifukushi, bone-setting and osteopathic treatment practitioners working in seikotsuin or seikotsuin clinics. Even today, many martial artists and combat sports athletes choose this profession as a second career after retiring from competition. This is the story of how the techniques of the samurai evolved into modern therapeutic practice, examined through both historical and medical perspectives. The origins of Judo Seifuku, Japanese bone-setting and rehabilitation techniques, lie in the development of kumiuchi grappling and jujutsu during Japan's Sengoku and Edo periods. Within the martial arts tradition, there existed two inseparable concepts: sappō, methods of killing or disabling an opponent, and kappō, methods of reviving or healing injured comrades and training partners. Masters who thoroughly understood destructive techniques, such as dislocating joints, breaking bones, or rendering an opponent unconscious by striking vital points, were often equally skilled at reversing those injuries and restoring the body. This was considered the essence of kasatsu jizai, the ability to both kill and heal at will. During the Edo period, many jujutsu practitioners treated injured people while also running martial arts schools. Jigoro Kano removed dangerous techniques from jujutsu and developed it into judo. However, it is said that in the training of pre-judo jujutsu, incidents of unconsciousness, dislocations, and broken bones were common. By the late Edo period, Japanese martial arts had begun to merge with traditional Chinese medicine and Rangaku, Dutch medicine, gradually forming something close to what is now known as judo therapy, bone setting and rehabilitation. The spread of Rangaku greatly contributed to the modernization of Japanese medicine as a whole. It can even be said that swordsmanship played an indirect role in this development. At the end of the Edo period, Rangaku scholars headed to a certain place in Edo, modern Tokyo, carrying anatomical books brought back from the Netherlands. That place was Kozukappara Execution Grounds. At Kozukappara, an official practice known as otomeshi goyo was conducted. High-ranking samurai entrusted their swords to specialists who tested the sharpness of the blades on the bodies of executed criminals. Tameshigiri, the practice of cutting rolled straw mats with a sword, is still used today in the training of iaido and traditional swordsmanship. Its roots are also said to lie in the execution grounds of the Edo period. However, the original art of shitojutsu, sword testing techniques, developed primarily as a method of performance testing to evaluate a sword's sharpness, and in many ways differed from practical battlefield swordsmanship. For example, because it was not based on actual combat exchanges with an opponent, practitioners are said to have employed distinctive movements and techniques, such as planting their feet firmly and making large overhead swings so wide that the blade nearly touched the back before cutting downward. At execution grounds, there were officially recognized individuals employed by the Tokugawa shogunate who, upon request from high-ranking people, tested the cutting ability of swords on the bodies of executed criminals and recorded rankings of blade performance. This position was passed down through 9 generations. It is said that scholars of Dutch learning, Rangaku, later received the decapitated bodies and corpses used for test cutting from these officials, comparing them with anatomical illustrations brought back from the Netherlands. They were astonished by how accurately the illustrations matched the actual human body. This is the actual site of a former execution ground. This massive Jizo statue was erected to memorialize the executed prisoners. Hundreds of thousands of executions are said to have been carried out in front of this jizo, and it is believed that around 35% of those executed were victims of wrongful convictions. Sword-testing executions were also conducted at this site. At the neighboring temple, there is a monument erected by the Japanese medical community honoring the Rangaku scholars of that era. If you would like to learn more, please check out the featured video linked in the description. As a side note, right beside this stone monument within the temple grounds lies the grave of Karl Gotch, the legendary professional wrestler who competed against Rikidozan, the man who knocked out Masahiko Kimura in the infamous unscripted double cross match and later became the central figure of Japanese professional wrestling after Rikidozan. Karl Gotch was also known as a rival of the legendary wrestler Lou Thez. Until then in Japan, the concept of gozo roppu from Chinese medicine had been widely accepted. Gozo roppu was a term used in traditional Chinese medicine to describe the body's internal organs as a whole, and its concept differed from the anatomical understanding of modern medicine. If we relate it to martial arts, the concept of Tanden may be considered somewhat similar. Tanden refers to the place where life energy is cultivated and stored. However, there is no actual organ called the Tanden. In modern times, some theories suggest that the concept may correspond to the body's deep core muscles, such as the transverse abdominis, diaphragm, pelvic floor muscles, and multifidus, which stabilize the torso. In martial arts training, practitioners are often told to focus on the Tanden. It is possible that martial artists of the past intuitively understood this area as the source of the body's power through practical experience. The concepts of vital points, kyusho, and meridians acupuncture points, keiraku and tsubo, have both been discussed in East Asian martial arts and traditional medicine, and historically, the two ideas overlap considerably. However, from the perspective of modern medicine, neither has been fully scientifically proven, and many aspects are still treated as traditional theories. Through the research of scholars of Dutch studies, Rangaku, it became widely recognized that traditional Chinese medical understandings of the skeleton and internal organs differed greatly from the actual structure of the human body. This marked a turning point, and the mainstream of Japanese medicine gradually shifted from Chinese medicine to Western medicine. After the Meiji Restoration, the government adopted the slogan, "Enrich the country, strengthen the military," Fukoku Kyohei, and promoted a policy of leaving Asia, joining Europe, Datsu a New O, placing strong emphasis on Western medicine. As a result, traditional practices such as kappō medicine and the healing arts of Jujutsu, Kappo, faced the danger of being dismissed as unscientific and outdated. However, at the time, there were still too few modern physicians to handle the rapidly increasing number of trauma patients. In addition, influential figures connected to Kodokan Judo, including its founder Kano Jigoro, who held considerable influence not only in the martial arts world but also in education and politics, worked to preserve these traditional practices. As a result, judo therapy evolved from a traditional art into a form of quasi-medical practice by incorporating Western medical knowledge such as anatomy. Today, licensed judo therapists are allowed to operate independently in clinics known as Seikotsuin, Seikotsuin, or Honetsugi in Japan. Their distinguishing feature is that they treat fractures, dislocations, sprains and bruises primarily through manual techniques without relying on X-rays, surgery, or medication. While Western medicine, Orthopedic medicine specializes in structural repair through diagnostic imaging such as MRI and CT scans, as well as surgery. Judo therapy specializes in non-invasive treatment, therapies that do not involve cutting the body and instead aim to maximize the body's natural healing ability. Today, judo therapists also work as athletic trainers in sports settings and as rehabilitation specialists, building a complementary relationship with Western medicine. At the same time, however, the judo therapy industry faces several major challenges. Fraudulent insurance claims. In principle, Japan's public health insurance only covers acute injuries. However, some clinics have improperly claimed insurance coverage for chronic shoulder stiffness or lower back pain, leading to stricter government oversight. Variation in educational quality. The rapid increase in training schools for certification has raised concerns about declining technical standards and insufficient medical knowledge among practitioners. Conflict with orthopedic medicine. Since only physicians have the legal authority to make formal medical diagnoses, the boundary between what doctors and judo therapists are permitted to do can become unclear, sometimes leading to disputes. Finally, it is worth touching on the historical mystery behind the phrase kasatsu jizai, the power to kill or revive at will. Some experts became skeptical of the description found in Judo Seifuku theory, supervised by the National Judo Therapy School Association, a textbook regarded as the standard reference for judo therapists, which presents the history of kappō and sappō as if it were synonymous with the historical development of medicine and martial arts themselves. According to these sources, the term kappō, revival techniques, originally referred only to resuscitation methods in the historical texts of the time. Likewise, the term sappō, killing techniques, was used almost exclusively in the context of striking vital points and not as a general term for combat systems. However, after the introduction of Western medicine during the Meiji period, interpretations began to appear that expanded kappō to include the treatment of fractures, bruises, and dislocations, while sappō came to be described as encompassing the entirety of samurai combat techniques. For this reason, some researchers have argued that the modern narrative claiming that kappō and sappō developed together as two sides of the same art may actually be a later reinterpretation and retrospective systematization rather than an original historical concept. Physicians known as kinsoi, specialists who treated injuries caused by swords, spears, arrows, and other battlefield weapons, were highly professional practitioners who emphasized practical experience and proven results. Rather than being techniques casually devised by martial artists, their methods are thought to have developed as an independent medical profession in their own right. So why then did the narrative of kappō and sappō become so widespread? According to researchers, it may have been because, after the Meiji Restoration, Jujutsu practitioners sought social legitimacy for their arts, or because Western anatomical knowledge was later superimposed onto older traditional practices. For example, terms such as kappō, revival techniques, and sappō, killing techniques, were first systematically organized in books from the Meiji-era, such as Nihon Jujutsu Kappo Shokai, detailed explanation of Japanese Jujutsu revival techniques. However, these works already incorporated elements of Western anatomical thinking, leading some scholars to argue that these concepts were, at least in part, redefined in modern times, so they would appear to represent an unbroken ancient tradition. Indeed, the kappō techniques introduced in this book are methods for reviving people who had lost consciousness from jujutsu choking techniques. Furthermore, in its anatomical explanations, there are no references to traditional Chinese medical concepts such as the gozo roppu, 5 viscera and 6 bowels, or the dantian. Instead, the book only presents diagrams indicating vulnerable points of the body as targets for sappō. The explanation accompanying these diagrams states the following. These areas are among the most dangerous parts of the human body. Therefore, one must avoid carelessly applying stimulation or strikes to them, not only to others but also to oneself, in order to prevent harm and danger. Accordingly, although it would normally be appropriate to provide physiological and anatomical explanations and detailed commentary regarding various striking methods and killing techniques, such explanations are omitted in this book. The narrative that Kappo and Sappo developed together as a unified tradition of martial and medical arts has long served as part of the historical identity of judo therapists and traditional bonesetters. However, based on the available historical sources, there is a growing possibility that these terms were actually constructed after the Meiji period through an expanded reinterpretation of philosophical concepts and limited resuscitation techniques. Further research and future scholarly findings are therefore highly anticipated. In other words, judo therapy was not simply a technique in which samurai healed people using secret revival methods that was passed down unchanged into the modern era. Bonesetting, the treatment for dislocations and fractures, is said to have been introduced to Japan from China during the Heian period and was initially practiced among the aristocracy. In 1746, Enki III Koshi Hoyoku of Oscus published the 3-volume Honetsugi Eiyoji Chohoki, Treasury of Bone-Setting Treatments. This is considered the oldest specialized book on bone-setting in Japan, and there is a theory that it was from this point that commoners also began to have access to these treatments. In his work, Koshi Hoyoku cites more than 10 types of Chinese medical texts, including the Yoka Shoji Juno, 1601. This indicates that bone-setting techniques up until the late Edo period did not suddenly emerge from martial arts dojos, but rather that those of Chinese origin remained the mainstream. It is easy to infer that practitioners of Jujutsu who engaged in intense daily training were likely exposed to a higher risk of dislocations and fractures than ordinary people. Consequently, they performed these treatments more frequently, which naturally led to the refinement and polishing of those techniques. In short, judo therapy is not a simple narrative of warriors passing down secret life-saving techniques, kappō, to the modern day. It is important to note that it was likely a product of modern reorganization, formed through a complex intersection of martial arts, folk remedies, wound medicine, kinsō-ai, Chinese medicine, Dutch studies, Rangaku, and modern medicine. Judo therapists today are specialists possessing highly modern medical knowledge, required to study specialized subjects such as orthopedic science, anatomy, and exercise physiology for at least 3 years, which is why the profession is designated as a national qualification. The phrase kasatsu jizai, the power to both kill and give life, was an alluring concept, symbolizing the mystery and spirituality of martial arts. However, historical records provide limited evidence of its existence as a systematic medical technology directly linked to modern judo therapists. It is highly probable that much of it was reinterpreted or reconstructed from the Meiji period onward. Nevertheless, it remains a fact that martial arts fostered a deep interest in the human body and played a certain role in the development of first aid and resuscitation methods. The history of pursuing both the technique of defeating others and the technique of healing them is undoubtedly the background of the modern profession of judo therapy. Kappo and Sappo, the way of life and the way of death. This may be more than just historical fact. It is perhaps a kind of historical image itself, reflecting how the Japanese people have understood the connection between the martial and the medical.
Japan B is a channel that randomly shares information about lesser-known aspects of Japanese culture, spanning across various genres.